I'm Steph.
And I'm Jeff. Each week, we review a film that's streaming online.
As writers, we'll deep dive into the characters and plot to tell you if it's a good story.
Listen at your own risk. This review contains spoilers.
Now sit back,
relax,
and enjoy Stream On. Today we'll be reviewing Our Kind of Traitor, streaming on Amazon Prime.
An English university professor on holiday with his wife meets cute with an Asian Russian mafia guy. Mafia guy wants to use him to pass on information to the British intelligence community in exchange for protection. Will the professor fall for the lovable murderous criminal? Or will he do what any normal person would do and go to the cops? Well, it wouldn't be a movie if he did the latter.
Our Kind of Traitor was directed by Susanna White and written by Hussein Amini. It's based on a John Le Carre novel from 2010 by the same name, and it stars Ewan McGregor as Perry McKendrick, a university professor who gets recruited on holiday to help out this Russian money launderer, Naomi Harris as Gail McKendrick, Perry's wife and a successful British barrister, Stellan Skarsgård as Dima, the Russian mafia money launderer, Damian Lewis as Hector, an MI6 agent, Alicia von Rittberg as Natasha, Dima's daughter, and Jeremy Northam as Aubrey Longrig, our corrupt government official.
Okay, Steph, so you picked this film. Why did you?
So I was in the mood for a spy thriller. We are working on writing our novel Broken, and this is a paranormal thriller that has some espionage elements to it. And because we had to do some significant edits, I wanted something that would help get me into that spy thriller mood. So that's really why I chose this. I also was really interested in seeing how another one of John Le Carre's novels adapted to film. He is prolific. He's had 10 of his spy thriller novels made into films, which is impressive. Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, The Constant Gardener, A Most Wanted Man are just a few examples. So this guy as a writer seems to have the spy thriller genre down to a science, and in a compelling enough way that his books have many of them made it to film. So I thought that it would be an interesting choice for us as aspiring writers to look at a film like this.
So I do have a question before we get into the plot analysis. Have you actually read any of his books?
I have not. Have you?
No, I haven't. And the reason I wanted to bring that up just before we get into this is that it would be interesting to see what elements of his books are actually ported over into film. What is it about these books, other than just that he's a name writer in that genre at this point?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like reading science fiction, fantasy, paranormal, the horror, those types of things. I don't read a ton of spy thrillers, although I really enjoy them on film. But I might check out one of his books now just to compare it.
Why don't we get into the plot analysis? Would you like to start us off?
Well, I thought a good place for us to start is to really look at what are the ingredients of a good spy thriller, because I think this genre has a couple key components that you see threaded throughout a lot of spy thrillers that almost are necessary to enjoy this genre. So one of the components I would say is location, location, location. It's one of the things that I've noticed in a lot of spy thrillers that this movie does well is that it jumps you around to these cool, exotic locations. You've got Africa, you've got different parts of Europe, like you've got Russia. It's really beautifully shot in all of these exotic locations, and it gives you that sense of pace about like our hero and the different characters, jumping around. And of course, you've got trains and helicopters and all of that as they're moving about the world. But what are your thoughts of the importance of location to make a good spy thriller?
Well, it depends on the subgenre you're in, because there are clearly different types of espionage stories. This is what I would consider kind of a hybrid of action-adventure and fish out of water. So the action adventure is more like a James Bond sort of thing. And that's where location is important, where you have the, debonair gentleman spy with the hard edge, of course, who's going to all these exotic places. And he goes to like the touristy areas, the places that really stand out. You don't just go to Paris. You have your fight on the Eiffel Tower kind of thing.
Right. Or if it's a Dan Brown model, the Louvre. Yeah.
Right. So this definitely has elements of that. The Fish Out of Water is more interesting because these sort of stories are when someone who is not either a spy or who is in some element of the espionage world and is dragged into another part of it. And a good example of like that is like 3 Days of the Condor, where you have a CIA analyst who, played by Robert Redford, who then gets dragged into this bigger plot where there's assassins trying to kill him. Now, that doesn't have much location. That's all shot in, I believe it's New York. The location part really gets more into that action-adventure thing, and it does work here. Mm-hmm. But you can definitely have espionage movies that don't have that.
Yeah, I guess it depends on, like, I was thinking more like the Mission Impossible style or the James Bond style. It really relies heavily on location as almost its own character to draw you into the excitement of the world of being a spy. Yeah, there's just this sense of location as character in these type of spy epics that I wanted to point out is, I think, an essential element to a spy action thriller. I think this movie would be a lot more boring if it only took place in Morocco.
Well, the Morocco setting, actually, you could have it there because for most viewers, that is going to be an exotic location. If it had been set, say, the entire thing set in London, I could see that where you'd be like, well, great. What's visually interesting about this? What's drawing me into the exoticism of a fantasized vision of espionage work, which is what this is.
But I think you need at least one other location besides Morocco, because you got to get your guy out. I mean, the whole thing is like dependent on getting like Dima to safety in a country that he can claim asylum in.
Well, but depending on the focus, though, I think you could actually have a single location. But I agree with you. The big thing is the exoticism. Mm-hmm. And now, bouncing from even kind of more mundane locations, like a James Bond movie doesn't always go to exotic places, but it's always moving from place to place. And that actually kind of creates that jet-setter, exotic worldview. It's a fantasy, right?
And it helps with the pace of the film to keep it fresh, where you're not bored for too long because you know you're going to be going to, like, you're in Paris and now you're going to be going to Switzerland soon.
Well, right. So if this had been purely set, say, in Marrakesh, the type of movie would have been different. It might have been like over the course of one night, our hero has to go through some obstacles to get this guy to safety, right, to the British authorities, as opposed to this, which definitely is much more, we're bouncing from city to city and doing this much more complex plot.
Another thing that I thought was like a key ingredient to this type of action spy thriller is the use of transportation. Like, there's stuff on a train, stuff in cars, stuff in helicopters. Like, you use these means of transportation to have your action scenes. Trains in particular, especially if the spy thriller is based at all in Europe, there's got to be some type of action or interesting scene involving a train or a train station. I don't know why that is, but I feel like if they didn't have a train scene, it wouldn't have been as good of a movie.
This is an interesting thing, that the stuff you're pointing out. So you're pointing out more of the physical trappings of your story. Mm-hmm. What would you say, though, is not related to that makes for a good spy thriller?
Well, some other things that I think are like beyond just constructing the world and some of that, you've got to have your corrupt politician. I would say that's like a key. There's like some insider that is corrupt. That's very Mission Impossible style. But that's something we see in this movie is you've got a corrupt British politician guy. A do-gooder hero that wants to do the right thing no matter what. Like your do-gooder James Bond or your do-gooder Perry in this case. Someone that is going to go to all odds to be able to, take down the corrupt bad guy. Steamy romance is nice to have. I don't think this film had enough of that, personally. I think it tried, but I don't think the chemistry, this is one of my complaints about the film, I don't think the chemistry was good between Ewan McGregor and Naomi Harris. I don't know. Their chemistry was off to me, so it didn't create enough steamy romance. But I think that's also something that really helps this genre out, is to have that, whether it's a femme fatale or the girl you want to save, either way, the damsel in distress. And then another thing I think that's good for spy thrillers is you got to have some cool surveillance scene where it's jumping around, where they're watching things and you're seeing different angles of it. This movie did a good job with that. So those are some of my thoughts. What about you?
Well, one thing I think with a spy thriller, and as I said, there are different types. So when I'm saying spy thriller, I'm talking about something like this, which is leaning a bit more heavily into some of the plottier elements of espionage, as opposed to, say, James Bond movie, which is really just an action film with an espionage skin over it. Mm-hmm. Is that the plot points in a good spy thriller should all hold together at the end. You should be able to look back and go, I understand why characters went from A to B to C. And to some degree, it's more important than in some other movies where you can just kind of paper things over. You can just suspend disbelief because of the genre you're in. But in here, the plots need to make sense. The character motivation needs to make sense. At the end of the day, there should not be a real Due Machina at the end that kind of fixes everything for a good thriller.
Agreed.
I think this film actually does it fairly well. There are a couple of plot points that don't work as well, which we can get into as far as just how the actual story is constructed. But for the most part, this is a good example of how to do a fish out of water story where our hero, Perry, is brought into a world that he isn't prepared for, but makes some fairly reasonable choices along the way that, so as you're watching him getting deeper into this plot, you can, for the most part, go, okay, I understand why he's doing it. It makes sense why he's doing it. And the actions he takes, for the most part, make sense. As far as some of the other things you had mentioned, some of the trappings, I think that if you want to do a good spy movie, you definitely want to show stuff. You want to show the surveillance scene. You want to have some of the cool gadgets. You want to give the viewer the impression that they're looking at kind of a neat world that's underneath ours.
Yeah, the safe house in the middle of the Alps, right? I thought that was cool. Visually, that was a neat place to put the safe house.
Yeah, and this movie does that. This is based on this and some of the other Le Carre adaptations I've seen. His stuff kind of bleed over into the action or more of the wish fulfillment kind of stuff. It's not like some gritty, realistic look at how you would extract a Russian mafia person, right? But it works really well. Mm-hmm. I mean, I will say one nice thing about this plot is that at no point was I bored with it. I was like, this moves really nicely.
It was well paced and it was entertaining throughout, and they had enough action interspersed, surveillance, sort of paranoia interspersed, that it kept the film going. And if nothing else, it was beautifully shot.
You're bringing up the point about Perry and Gale. I agree with. They didn't have much chemistry on screen, and I found that the problems between them, that he had basically cheated on her with one of his students, it seemed unnecessary. There's kind of a half-assed redemption arc, but I found it so secondary to the interesting stuff in the movie.
Yeah, I agree. It wasn't necessary to put that in. That was the impetus for why they were on holiday, to try to help save their marriage. But the thing is, they could have gone on holiday to Morocco, right? Without that. They could have just been a couple on holiday with no tension in their marriage. And Perry just decided to stay longer to drink, and she left to go to bed early, which is how he ended up meeting Dima at the restaurant, right? So you didn't need all of that. And especially because their sexual chemistry, maybe their chemistry was off because they were trying to show what it's like to have trouble in the marriage. But by the time they went to repair it, when they were in the safe house in the Alps, where it was supposed to be this really romantic moment between them, it was so awkward. It didn't, there wasn't this, I was waiting for the passionate love scene that never came, and it was disappointing.
For me, part of it too is that the tension in the marriage seemed like a real cliche, that he slept with one of his students. Mm-hmm. I think to me, it would have worked better if it had been something else more unique, or something that seemed just more dramatically impactful. Because that's kind of dragged out. That is not a plot point immediately. There's some tension there because of how they're acting to each other, but you don't find out for a while what it is. Mm-hmm. And once I found out, I'm like, oh, that's it? I don't know. I guess I was expecting something more shocking than just...
Well, like they lost a child or something more dramatic. Yeah, potentially. I mean, I think Ewan McGregor and Naomi Harris are fine actors in and of themselves. I just think the two of them, their chemistry was off. I think there needed to be some different casting there if you really wanted to do more with that storyline.
Yeah, I agree. Was there anything about the plot, though, other than, obviously, what we just talked about with these characters, was there anything about the plot that really didn't sit well with you? Because there are a few things that stood out to me as problems.
The biggest thing for me was the off chemistry between Perry and Gale. So that was my number one thing. Everything else about this film I thought worked pretty well. I mean, the helicopter blow up at the end was a little plotty, but I bought it in the context of this film. What about you?
There were two things that I had issues with, one of which I'd consider fairly minor, and that was the way that Perry and Gale find out about the actual state of the operation they've attached to. So what that means for people listening is that most of this operation to get him to London and to safety is being done basically by two guys because MI6 has said, well, we're not interested in this. We find out why, but it has to do with corruption in the British government. But
Aubrey Longrig.
Right, but Gale and Perry think that they're actually just working for British intelligence, and that's the way it's portrayed to them. Until near the end, where basically the only other person working this, there's the guy running the operation and his sidekick, and his sidekick just kind of blurts it out. I don't know, that seems so weird, like, why is he saying that? And he wasn't even saying it like, you two civilians need to get out of here. He just sort of blurts it out. And it seemed very plotty, like, oh, we need some, the beginning of the third act, we need that tension between the characters now. So but I don't consider that a major problem. It just struck me as odd.
Interesting. Like, I guess I remember that scene, and I guess I think of it as the sidekick to Hector, who's the main, MI6 agent on a mission to get Dima. Like, basically the idea is they're going to give Dima asylum in exchange for his intelligence about money laundering among the wealthy of Britain with the Russian mafia and that whole thing. And so I just took it as the sidekick character was just getting tired of being dragged along on Hector's personal vendetta against Aubrey, and he just was like at his wit's end when he blurted it out. So I bought it in the context of the story. But I can see where it's a bit plotty, but I bought it.
I will say this in my notes. So I have different kind of notes, like shorthand, that I have when I'm writing. And for there it was, that's odd. So a that's odd comment doesn't mean it's like a severe problem, but it is something that stands out as an odd moment.
So what's your bigger issue?
The big one, though, has to do with this pregnancy subplot.
Oh, right.
Okay, so
the daughter.
Right. So Dima's daughter is pregnant by his bodyguard, who it turns out is betraying him to this Russian mob boss who ultimately wants to kill Dima. And at one point, she then calls him being the father, and pretty much gives away where they are.
From the safe house.
Right. Which then leads to the final action scene where a hit team, and a fairly small hit team too, which was weird, shows up to kill Dima, and there's action and blah, blah, and the movie ends. That was so contrived. It didn't make sense. I didn't understand why would this woman, who clearly, I'd assume, knows what her father does, and must understand that there's danger here, why would she do something like that? Why would she call this guy up before they're safe?
Because pregnancy hormones, and she's in love.
Wow.
She's a teenager. She's not 25 with her prefrontal cortex fully developed. She's a hormonal teenager that is pregnant with a guy that she thinks is safe, that she loves, and thinks that this guy is on their side. So I was okay with it because I'm thinking, like, she's a teenager. She doesn't have... I get they used it to move the story along, but I bought it.
Well, and like I said, it goes back to one of my pet peeves with movies. I'm more forgiving of secondary plot holes. So if it's something that's not part of the main plot that there's an issue with, I can overlook those sort of things. This is so important to how the film ends, though, that I think there need to be a better explanation than pregnancy hormones.
If they had done a scene where they showed that Natasha, who's Dima's daughter, was really better in the know about what was going on, or if they had done a scene that showed that she was really not in the know, that could have worked. Like, either way, like, you have to either make it really purposeful that she did that, like maybe she is working for the other side, like either make it really purposeful that she knows that this is going to cause the hit team of the Russian mafia to come into the Swiss Alps and try to take out Dima and crew, or that she is so clueless that the dad has successfully done a good job convincing her that he, I don't know, does some kind of, corporate global work or something random like that, that she really doesn't understand the layers of complexity of what he does. Like, you needed a scene to tie it together one way or another.
Well, I think the other thing too is that it's such a secondary character. She has screen time, but there's no real character there. And for such an important thing to hinge on this background character is a problem for me.
Yeah, what you could have done, maybe this would have been interesting, is maybe Gail is frustrated that she got pulled into this mess, and as revenge to Perry for sleeping with the student, she's the one that does something or calls it. Like, you didn't necessarily need Natasha to be you needed somebody to give away their location, but Gail might have been a better choice and would have made the tension between Perry and Gail more interesting, is if she's the one that betrayed their location. I
actually like the idea that, I don't mind it being Natasha. I like the idea that she purposely does it. That she's, this teenager is pregnant and the guy, the bodyguard or whatever, talks her into it and says, if you do this, we'll be safe.
Yeah,
your father's a monster anyway. Look at the horrible things he's done.
Yeah, the Russian mafia will protect us and the baby and the this and the that. Yeah, I mean, we would have needed a scene to tie that together.
Right. So again, because it is what leads to the conclusion, that really, like I said, stands out. But other than that, I don't know. The plot is pretty good.
What do you think about the helicopter part, where the helicopter blows up and that whole thing?
I saw it coming. I don't know. I mean, yeah. I pretty much knew that once that happened, I was like, oh, he's going to be killed. So that's it.
Well, and it's the whole thing about don't go. Like, it's almost like he knew it too. It's like, don't come with me. So.
Did you have any questions? This is definitely a minor issue, but I will bring it up. So I kind of was questioning the plot, though, or the plan that the head of this new Russian mafia or whatever was carrying out, where he's having different mafia members sign over whatever holdings they have to him and then immediately executing them.
And literally giving them that gun.
I'm like, what kind of plan is that? I guess that works the first time. After that, isn't every one of your underlings going to be like, well, I'm not signing anything over this dude?
Well, they know it. Like, it's like you can see the fear. Weird. They know it coming as soon as they're given that, symbolic gun that he gives the speech about. It's like they know they're next to be killed off. But I got the impression it's like there's nothing they could do about it. If they don't, they're going to be killed either way.
I guess. Like, that really struck me as one of those, for what otherwise is a fairly, even for some of the action-y adventure elements, it is still a fairly traditional espionage movie. That struck me as like, this guy doesn't plan things ahead. Why not get everyone to sign off first and then go and kill them?
The new regime isn't as smart as the old regime of the Russian mafia. The only other thing I really wanted to point out is Dima's character, I thought, was a good example of an anti-hero character, which those are fun to write. He was a bad guy. He's a Russian mafia money launderer. So we know this guy isn't fully good, but he's trying to do the right thing in the end. He's trying to get his family to safety. It really is about protecting him and his family, but he is going to expose the Russian mafia. So I thought Stellan Skarsgård did a really good job playing this lovable anti-hero character. And I just find anti-heroes in general fun to write and fun to see on film.
Well, and see, that's an interesting point, because I'm not certain if I'd call him an anti-hero. I think that he was he is a bad guy who is first the entree for the fish out of water into this new world. He has some positive aspects, but there's nothing particularly heroic about him in the sense of everything he's doing, but even betraying his former colleagues, is basically to save his life.
And I guess I see it as anti-hero because he is saving him and his family's life. So it's also about protecting his family, but it's also about exposing the Russian mafia and how deep the money laundering has infected British institutions. So like he could, expose many high powerful people at the risk of his own, like it is risking his own life to do that, but he knows he's kind of dead either way. So I see that as anti-hero, but maybe it's just how we define the term.
Right. See, I see anti-hero as that it's someone who would start in a non-heroic mode who then makes a choice to do something out of purely that would generally be seen as a heroic or positive thing. But it's a choice. It's not out of like a survival instinct. And I actually have an example because I know this is a little convoluted. Han Solo from Star Wars. Han Solo, when you first meet him, is, the smuggler, just in it for the money. Finally, at the end of the movie, he gets what he wants. He has his money. He can just leave. But he makes that choice to risk his life to go back and save Luke during the Battle of the Death Star. He didn't have to do that. He did it out of his own choice because he has transitioned from, if not a villain, at least a rogue or a non-hero, into being this kind of rough-edged anti-hero.
Let's jump into our wrap-up of this film.
Okay.
What scene did you like best?
So, at the beginning of the film, there is a party scene. This is after Perry and Dima meet, and Dima's like, hey, come with you, I'm going to this party. And Perry goes with him. It was a nice introduction to this world where there's a lot of things that are very seductive, so you can see why Perry would, find this a fascinating world to move into. It's all these, beautiful people. He's literally like given a hostess to take care of him, and she's gorgeous and offers him drugs and gets booze for him and all that kind of stuff. And he's clearly, this is not the kind of world he's used to. But we also, at the end of that, get to see that Perry, even though he is seduced by this or attracted to this kind of world, he has an inherent goodness because he goes in and rescues some woman from being sexually assaulted. And he didn't need to do that. Mm-hmm. And if he had been acting more of in more like a self-interested way, he would probably look around and go, well, I'm clearly with some bad dudes, so I'm not going to go risk that. But he still does. I thought that was actually a good way to introduce that character and to show, both, if not really a dark side, but why he would find a person like Dima someone he would want to be around, and at the same time, he never loses that core goodness. Mm-hmm. And that helps explain why he does the things he does later in the film.
Yeah. No, that I would agree. That was a good scene to show like more depth of his character.
So, Steph, what's your favorite scene?
So I liked a scene with Hector in it where he's at the table with a bunch of other like British government intelligence officials, and he does this really good speech that talks about dirty money. He's trying to basically convince these powerful people at the table that Arena Bank is this corrupt bank that's being used to hide a bunch of, Russian mafia money. And I actually wrote down the speech because I really liked it. It's an eighth of the world's economy is black, blood money. That's all it is. It could be in a box under a drug lord's bed or at a city bank next to a vintage port. It doesn't change color. It's still blood money. And I just thought it was like it was well acted by Damian Lewis, and it was a good speech to explain blood money and that dirty money can be hid in a variety of fashions. So it's just powerfully done.
Okay, so what was your least favorite scene?
I've spoke about this earlier, so I won't spend too much time on it. But basically, it's the poor chemistry between Ewan and Naomi as actors and their characters, particularly in the safe house cabin bedroom scene. It just was really off to me. What about you?
It's like you, it's something I've already talked about. It's all the pregnancy plotline stuff that I found very contrived and unnecessary. And, obviously the problems I already talked about with that. What would you rate this film from 0 to 5? Espionage pandas?
I liked this one. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. It's a solid spy thriller. It zips around to cool locations in Europe, Africa, Asia. Stellan Skarsgård, I would say, steals the screen in this one. You have to suspend disbelief a little bit about Perry being a professor turned spy and his ability to do that well with the action and all that. It lost some points for me, mainly because of the poor on-screen chemistry between Ewan and Naomi. I just think that was miscast. But overall, would recommend this one. It's a good spy thriller escape film. What about you, Jeff?
Pretty much the same. I gave it 3.5. And for most of the same reasons. It has very nice pacing, story that holds together nicely. There are some contrivances, but to me, they don't detract enough from this film to not make it entertaining.
And we agree to the decimal point on this one, 3.5.
Amazing.
Okay, well, what do we got next week, Jeff?
So next week, we're going to be checking out The Andromeda Strain on Tubi. Stream On is a production of Steph and Jeff Wrights Media. Reproduction without written consent is prohibited. All rights reserved. 2021.